to be just another ordinary day at a high-end restaurant. But when Snoop Dogg walked in undercover, what he experienced left him shocked and furious. Disrespect, mockery, and outright humiliation from his own employees. But what Snoop does next will leave everyone speechless. Watch until the end to see how he turns everything upside down. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know, how would you handle it if you were in Snoop's position? Snoop Dogg sat in his studio, the dim glow of recording equipment surrounding him as he leaned back in his chair, rolling a cigar between his fingers. It wasn't often he had time to relax these days, juggling his music, business ventures, and public appearances. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere. Over the past few months, an idea had taken root. A personal project, something far removed from his usual ventures. He wanted a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, but a place that could feel like home for anyone walking through its doors, a sanctuary of good food and good vibes. The idea first hit him during a conversation with a friend who mentioned a popular upscale eatery that was up for sale. Known for its fine dining and chic ambiance, the place had a sterling reputation, but whispers of changes in ownership had started circulating. It was an opportunity Snoop couldn't ignore. He envisioned a spot where he could kick back after a long day or host intimate gatherings with friends, all while ensuring that it upheld his ideals of respect and inclusivity. He made the decision quietly, contacting his business manager and lawyers to handle the transaction. Everything was set up to keep his name out of the spotlight. He wanted this venture to remain a secret, at least for now. The restaurant's staff had no idea their establishment had changed hands, let alone that their new boss was one of the most iconic figures in the entertainment industry. When the deal closed, Snoop celebrated in his own way, a small toast with close friends and family, far from the public eye. But even as he savored the victory, he knew the real work was just beginning. Owning a restaurant was about more than the paperwork. It was about ensuring that the place truly lived up to his vision. And there was only one way to find out if it would. A week later, Snoop found himself parked outside the restaurant. His car was understated. Nothing flashy, just an ordinary black sedan that wouldn't draw attention. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap, pulling the brim low over his face. He wanted to blend in, to see the restaurant as any other customer would. This wasn't about being Snoop Dogg, the celebrity. Tonight, he was just a man looking for a good meal. As he stepped out of the car, the crisp evening air greeted him. The restaurant stood before him, its warm lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, inviting and elegant. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cap, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was exactly what he'd hoped for. The soft clinking of glasses, quiet murmurs of conversation, and the mouth-watering aroma of expertly crafted dishes wafting from the kitchen. The space was elegant without being ostentatious, a balance he'd always appreciated. He scanned the room, noting the well-dressed patrons at their tables, some laughing in groups, others enjoying quiet moments alone. He approached the hostess stand, where a young woman glanced up from her clipboard. Her expression was polite but distant, her eyes quickly scanning his casual attire. "Good evening," she said. "Do you have a reservation?" Snoop shook his head. "Nah, just me tonight. Got room for one?" The hostess hesitated, her gaze flickering to a seating chart before returning to him. "Let me check," she said, her tone neutral. She disappeared into the dining area for a moment, then returned with a slight frown. "We have a table near the entrance. Follow me." Snoop nodded and followed her through the restaurant, noting the subtle glances from other diners. Some barely noticed him, while others gave him a quick once-over before returning to their meals. It wasn't unusual. He'd long since grown used to being a subject of curiosity. Still, something about the atmosphere felt different. The hostess led him to a small table near the entrance, away from the larger, more prominent seating areas. She placed a menu on the table without another word and walked away. Snoop sat down, flipping through the menu as he glanced around the room. He wanted to get a feel for the place, to see how the staff interacted with customers. It didn't take long for the first signs of trouble to appear. Minutes ticked by and no one came to his table. He noticed servers bustling around the other patrons, chatting and laughing as they delivered drinks and appetizers. Yet no one acknowledged him. He raised an eyebrow but remained patient, observing the flow of the dining room. Finally, a waitress approached. Her name tag read Jessica, and her demeanor was far from welcoming. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone clipped as if she were doing him a favor by taking his order. Snoop offered a polite smile. "I'll take the house special and a glass of water." Jessica scribbled the order on her notepad, barely glancing at him. "Sure," she muttered, turning on her heel without another word. As he waited, Snoop continued to watch the room. The staff seemed friendly enough with the other diners, their interactions warm and engaging. Yet, with him, there was a clear difference, a coldness, an unspoken judgment that he could feel with every passing moment. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was unmistakable. When Jessica finally returned with his drink, she placed it on the table with a thud and walked away without a word. Snoop took a sip, his mind racing. This wasn't what he'd envisioned for his restaurant. Not even close. The main course arrived, and while the presentation was decent, the taste was another story. The food was bland, lacking the attention to detail he'd expected from a place with such a reputation. He took a few bites, then set his fork down, his appetite gone. As he finished his meal, Jessica returned with the check, her expression indifferent. "Anything else?" she asked, her tone making it clear she hoped the answer was no. Snoop shook his head. "I'm good," he said, pulling out cash to cover the bill and leaving a generous tip despite the poor service. He stood up, glancing around the room one last time before heading for the door. Outside, he leaned against his car, staring at the restaurant's glowing sign. This wasn't just about a bad meal or rude service. It was about something deeper, something that went against everything he believed in. As he got into the car and drove away, a plan began to form in his mind. He would return, but next time he wouldn't come as a humble customer. He would return as the owner, and the staff who had dismissed and disrespected him would face the consequences. Snoop Dogg sat in his car, parked just down the street from the restaurant. The night was cool, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustle of leaves. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel as he gazed at the glow of the restaurant's entrance. People came and went, laughing, talking, their silhouettes framed by the warm golden light spilling out of the glass doors. To them, it was just another night out. To Snoop, it was something much bigger. This time, he wasn't just here to dine, he was here to see it all. Every glance, every gesture, every smirk. His hoodie was pulled low, and his eyes stayed sharp beneath the brim of his baseball cap. It wasn't about hiding his face. It was about blending in, being just another guy in the crowd. No chains, no flashy clothes, no entourage, just him. He sat for a moment longer, letting the beat of his own thoughts settle into a rhythm. This wasn't the first time he'd faced disrespect. Life had taught him to keep his cool when people showed their true colors. But this wasn't just about him anymore. This was his restaurant. His name might not be on the front sign, but every dish, every plate, every customer's experience belonged to him now. That meant something. And if people were being treated unfairly in his house, then something had to change. Finally, he stepped out of the car, hoodie still up, hands in his pockets, and walked with an unhurried stride toward the entrance. He pushed open the glass door and was greeted by the familiar blend of scents: garlic, rosemary, sizzling steak, fresh bread. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. This was the feeling he'd wanted his restaurant to give people. Warmth, comfort, satisfaction. But that feeling vanished the moment he stepped inside. He caught the shift immediately. The soft buzz of conversation continued, but something was different. The eyes, the looks. It wasn't just one or two glances, it was a wave. Patrons turned their heads just slightly, some whispering, others offering those quick, darting looks people give when they're trying not to be obvious. It was subtle, but he'd seen it too many times before. People assuming, people judging. The hostess was at her podium, tapping on a tablet. She didn't notice him at first. He stepped forward, waiting, giving her time to see him. It took longer than it should have. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but firm. She glanced up and her eyes did that thing. That quick flicker from his shoes to his face, the way people measure someone's worth in an instant. She blinked, tilting her head slightly. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," he said, "looking for a table. Just me tonight." Her eyes shifted toward the dining area, scanning for open seats. There were plenty. She could have seated him immediately. But instead, she hesitated. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked. "Nope," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. She pressed her lips together and checked her tablet again. A long pause. Too long. He watched her eyes scan over the empty tables as if she were looking for an excuse. "We're pretty full tonight," she said, not meeting his gaze. "Looks like you got plenty of room," he replied, nodding toward the dining area. Her eyes darted in the direction he pointed, then back to him. She gave him a tight, practiced smile, the kind you see on people who've already decided they're not going to help you. "Those tables are for reservations only." Snoop raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning. "Word? I just saw two people walk in without one." The hostess's face twitched. She shifted on her feet, tapping her tablet again like she was looking for something to say. "Look, I'll see what I can do, just wait here," she muttered before walking off toward the back of the restaurant.
Just when I thought I couldn't love living in Texas more, they go and release something like this. If you haven't seen it yet, it's been going viral.
He stood there, hands still in his pockets, glancing around. More eyes on him. Whispered words exchanged. He could feel it. They didn't know him. Not as him. To them, he was just another black man in a hoodie standing at the front of a place he supposedly didn't belong. Minutes passed. More minutes. His patience thinned. Eventually, the hostess returned, avoiding his eyes. "We've got a small table near the entrance," she said, like it was the best she could do. "Follow me." He followed her to a cramped two-seat table by the front window, close to the door where the cold draft blew in every time someone entered. This wasn't just coincidence. It was placement. The kind of table you give someone you don't want staying long. But he sat anyway, calm, collected, watching everything. His server arrived. Jessica. He recognized her from his first visit. She didn't seem to recognize him, though. Her attitude was the same. Cold, clipped, just short of rude. "Water?" she asked flatly, not looking at him. "Yeah, water's good," he said. She nodded, scribbled it down, and walked off before he could say anything else. No smile, no warmth, nothing. He watched her head to the next table, and like magic, she was all smiles for them. Laughter, jokes, full charm mode. It was clear now, crystal clear. His drink arrived, thudded onto the table like she was dropping a heavy book. No eye contact, no enjoy, just a thud and gone. He took a sip, his eyes narrowing. When she returned to take his order, her attitude hadn't improved. "Ready to order?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I'll take the house special," he said. Another scribble, another walk-off. No, thank you, no acknowledgement, just silence. The food took longer than expected, too long. He noticed other tables getting their meals before him, even those who arrived later. When it finally came, she dropped it on the table with the same casual carelessness she'd shown his drink. No words, no glance, just thud, gone. He stared at the plate. It was sloppy. The garnish was off-center, the sauce smeared along the edge. He knew how the food was supposed to look. He'd seen the presentation files from the head chef himself. This wasn't it. Not even close. He took one bite, bland, no seasoning, no care. He didn't even finish it. Just sat back, tapping his fingers on the table, watching Jessica, watching the hostess, watching the way their eyes met across the room as they shared a laugh. He knew that laugh. He'd heard it before. It was the sound of people thinking they'd won. She came back with the check, tossing it on the table. "Whenever you're ready," she muttered, barely looking at him. He paid in cash, left a generous tip, not for her, but for himself. It was the kind of move that said, "I see you, I see all of you." On his way out, he stopped by the door, looked back one last time. They didn't notice him staring. Not yet, but they would. He stepped outside, letting the cool air hit his face. His eyes turned to the glow of the restaurant sign overhead. It was a beautiful sign, sleek and modern. It was supposed to be a symbol of class, warmth, and elegance. But tonight, it just felt hollow. He pulled out his phone. With one tap, he started recording. His face filled the screen, hoodie up, eyes locked on the camera. "What's up, y'all?" he began, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I just walked out of a restaurant. My restaurant. Yeah, you heard me. Mine." He turned the camera, giving his followers a glimpse of the building. This is what happens when they don't know who you are, when they think you don't belong. "You see this place? This is my spot. I bought it. I own it. And tonight, I came in to see how they treat regular people. What I saw?" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Straight-up disrespect, cold looks, rude service. Food so bad I wouldn't feed it to my dog." He looked directly into the camera. "You know me. You know I don't let stuff like this slide. Stay tuned. This story ain't over." He hit post. By the time he reached his car, his phone was buzzing. Comments, reposts, fire emojis. The floodgates had opened. Tomorrow, the world would know. The sun hadn't even risen yet, but Snoop Dogg's phone was already on fire. Notifications rolled in like an unstoppable flood. Likes, comments, reposts, direct messages. His video had gone viral overnight. As he sat at the kitchen counter of his home, his phone buzzed continuously, lighting up every few seconds with new alerts. He sipped his morning coffee, scrolling through the endless stream of reactions. "Can't believe they disrespected Snoop like that," one comment read, followed by fire emojis and angry face emojis. "Imagine how they treat people who don't own the place," said another. "Name and shame that spot," demanded one of his followers, their comment liked thousands of times. Celebrities, influencers, and fans alike had joined in the conversation. Fellow artists like Kendrick Lamar and Ice Cube reposted the video with captions like "unacceptable" and "this gotta change." News outlets caught wind of the story and headlines began to pop up on Twitter, Instagram, and even news websites. Snoop Dogg exposes restaurant for disrespect and racism. Viral video reveals shocking treatment of Snoop Dogg in his own restaurant. Snoop Dogg calls out his own staff, and the internet is not having it. The internet was ruthless. The comment sections were flooded with people tagging the restaurant's social media pages, demanding explanations and calling for boycotts. People were digging up old reviews, looking for any sign that other guests had been mistreated. Within hours, hashtags like #RespectSnoop and #BoycottTheSpot were trending on Twitter. Snoop leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on his phone. The plan had worked. He wasn't usually one for public drama, but sometimes public pressure was the only way to spark real change. If people thought he'd forget about this, they didn't know Snoop. He opened Instagram Live. Within seconds, thousands of people joined, their comments flying in at lightning speed. "Yo, yo, yo," he said with a smirk, leaning into the camera. "I see y'all wildin' out here. I see the love. I see the energy. I see it all. And you're right. What happened last night? Nah, we ain't letting that slide." He tilted the camera to show the morning sunlight spilling through his kitchen windows. "See, I was quiet last night. Real quiet. But today, today we loud. Y'all already know I'm about respect. I built that place to be about respect. Everybody eats. Everybody's welcome. But apparently, some folks didn't get the message." The comments exploded. Fans typed in all caps. "Facts. Name names, Unc." "Shut it down, Snoop." Snoop chuckled. "Oh, we gon' name names, don't worry. But I want y'all to understand something. This ain't just about me. Yeah, they disrespected Snoop Dogg, but you know what that tells me? They've been doing this to everybody. Ain't no way I'm the first person to feel that vibe." His face grew more serious. "So here's the plan. I'm heading back today. This time they gon' see me for real. Not in a hoodie. Not as some random dude walking in off the street. Nah, today they see the owner. And trust me, everybody who disrespected me is going to feel it." He leaned in closer to the camera, his eyes sharp with intensity. "Stay tuned." The live ended, and within minutes, clips of his message were everywhere. The media picked it up, spinning it into a bigger story. News anchors dissected his words. "Snoop Dogg takes control of his restaurant after viral incident," one anchor announced on a major network. Every major blog was reposting his live video. Memes flooded social media with captions like, "They disrespected the wrong one," and "When you don't know, the boss is in the building." The world was watching now. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, it was anything but calm. Jessica was scrolling through her phone at the server station, her face pale as she read comment after comment. Her name was everywhere. People had identified her from the video and were flooding her social media accounts with messages. "Apologize to Snoop. Shame on you, Jessica. Hope you like unemployment." Her heart pounded in her chest as she tapped through her messages, some of which were more threatening than critical. Her coworkers weren't faring much better. Every waiter, chef, and the bartender who had been seen laughing or ignoring Snoop in the background was being called out online. One cook named Tyler scrolled through his phone with wide eyes. "Man, I didn't even say nothing, and they tagging me like I'm the one that brought the rat," he muttered to himself. Another waiter, Carlos, leaned against the wall, rubbing his face in frustration. "They got the whole world calling us racist, bro. This is crazy," he said to the bartender, who nodded in agreement. "You think he's really coming back?" asked the bartender, glancing nervously at the front door. Carlos sighed. "He said it on live, didn't he? Man, if I were y'all, I'd be calling in sick today." Jessica shook her head furiously. "He's bluffing. Celebrities always say they coming, but they ain't about to pull up in person." She tossed her phone onto the counter, trying to sound confident, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. "You sure about that?" Tyler asked, raising an eyebrow. "'Cause I saw that look on his face when he left last night. That wasn't see you later energy. That was, I'm coming back for blood energy." Jessica bit her lip, anxiety creeping up her spine. The manager, a man named Victor, walked in at that moment, his face flushed with stress. "All right, everybody, listen up," he barked. "I know you've seen the videos. I know you've seen the comments. We are not talking to press. If anyone calls, you tell them no comment." "Understood?" Everyone nodded in silence. The air was thick with tension. "Corporate is on my back about this," Victor continued, loosening his tie. "If Snoop Dogg walks through that door, you smile. You apologize. I don't care if you gotta get on your knees, you make it right. We are not losing this restaurant because y'all don't know how to act." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, then closed it again. She'd never seen Victor this serious. "Got it?" Victor barked. "I want professionalism from every single one of you." The staff nodded, but the mood was grim. Outside the restaurant, news vans began pulling up, reporters with microphones and cameras lined the sidewalk, hoping to catch a glimpse of Snoop Dogg when he arrived. People walking by stopped to take photos and live stream the growing spectacle. Word had spread that Snoop might show up today, and nobody wanted to miss it. The reporters spoke to the camera, their voices clear and urgent. "We're live at the scene where music icon Snoop Dogg is expected to arrive any moment now." Tensions are high as customers and staff prepare for what could be a major confrontation between the rapper and his employees. One reporter added, "Fans are calling for mass firings, and many are expecting Snoop Dogg to take direct action. Will he shut the place down? Will he fire the staff? We'll have updates as the story develops." Jessica watched it all from the window, her heart racing. This was supposed to be just another shift, just another night at work. Now? Her face was all over the internet. Reporters were outside. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. People she barely knew were texting her saying, "You're on TMZ, girl." She wanted to disappear. She wanted to believe it would blow over. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't. Across town, Snoop Dogg put his phone on the charger, pulled on a fresh tracksuit, and glanced at himself in the mirror. No hoodie today, no disguise. This time, they'd see him coming. He picked up his car keys and smiled to himself. Showtime. The sun hung high in the sky, its golden glow reflecting off the glass windows of the restaurant. But the warmth of the day did nothing to thaw the icy tension building inside. The staff had been on edge since they clocked in. Every glance toward the front door felt heavier than the last. Jessica paced near the server station, her phone in hand, scrolling through comment after comment on social media. Her face was pale, her fingers shaky. Every notification felt like a ticking time bomb. "He's not coming," she muttered under her breath, though her eyes told a different story. Her nerves were shot. She'd barely slept after being tagged in thousands of hate comments. Celebrities always say they're coming but never show up. It's all for clout. Carlos leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Yeah? Tell that to the 3 news vans outside," he shot back, nodding toward the window. Jessica glanced outside and saw the swarm of reporters standing across the street, cameras rolling, mics raised, ready to catch the moment Snoop Dogg walked through the door. She could see the headlines already. "Snoop Dogg confronts restaurant staff after viral disrespect incident." Her stomach twisted. Tyler, one of the cooks, walked past, adjusting his apron. "Y'all better get ready for cameras in your face. If Snoop walks in here, ain't no hiding from it. Everybody gonna see it." He chuckled to himself, shaking his head like it was all one big joke. But it wasn't a joke. Not anymore. The restaurant manager, Victor, stepped in with his phone pressed to his ear, his tie already loose around his neck. His face was slick with sweat, and the frustration was plain on his face. "No, I don't know if he's coming, but I can't have cameras in my face when he does. I told corporate we're handling it, but they keep blowing up my phone." He rubbed his temple with his free hand, his eyes darting toward the entrance every few seconds like he expected the door to burst open. Yeah, I get it. Damage control, I'm on it." He hung up and let out a heavy sigh, glancing at Jessica. "You," he pointed at her, "when he comes, if he comes, keep your mouth shut. Smile, apologize, do not say anything stupid." Jessica swallowed hard and nodded, her eyes locked on the floor. "Don't just nod, Jess," Victor snapped, his patience thin. "I mean it. No smart remarks, no attitude. If he walks in here and you do anything to make it worse, you're done. You hear me?" "Yeah," Jessica muttered, still not looking up. The door chime rang. Everyone froze. Heads turned in unison toward the entrance. But it wasn't him. Just an elderly couple walking in, smiling and chatting like nothing was wrong. A wave of relief washed through the staff, but it didn't last. The clock kept ticking. They knew it was only a matter of time. Minutes passed. More customers arrived. Waiters moved between tables, carrying trays, taking orders, and pouring drinks. But their movements were stiff, their smiles forced. Even the diners felt it. The tension in the air was palpable. Customers glanced toward the door as if they too were waiting for something to happen. Then it happened. A sleek, black SUV pulled up to the curb right in front of the restaurant. The engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was still. No one got out right away. Carlos, peering through the front window, cursed under his breath. "He's here," he muttered, eyes wide. "Oh, he's here." Jessica's heart stopped. Her eyes flicked to the door, her breath shallow. "Nah, that's not him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the moment the driver's side door opened and a familiar figure stepped out, she knew it in her bones. It wasn't the hoodie-wearing low-key Snoop from the other night. No, this was Snoop Dogg. Fresh tracksuit, gold chain shining bright in the sun, shades low on his nose, his eyes sharp and focused. This was the man they all knew from music videos and award shows, and now he was walking straight toward them. Reporters rushed in like a stampede, shouting questions, cameras flashing. "Snoop, are you shutting down the restaurant? Is it true you're firing the whole staff? Do you have a message for your fans?" He didn't answer any of them. He didn't have to. His face said it all. He was locked in. No distractions, no games. His stride was slow, deliberate, powerful. People on the sidewalk moved aside as if they could feel the weight of his presence. Inside, Victor's heart pounded in his chest. "All right, everybody, stay cool," he barked. "Stay cool." The front door swung open. The bell chimed. The restaurant fell into complete silence. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates. All eyes turned to the entrance. Snoop stepped in, his hands in his pockets, his gaze cutting through the room like a blade. No hoodie this time. No disguise. No hiding. His eyes scanned the crowd slowly, taking in every face, every reaction. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Her feet felt like they were stuck in cement. Her palms were sweaty, her heart racing. She glanced at Victor, silently pleading for guidance, but he didn't move. Nobody did. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Snoop's eyes landed on Jessica. She felt it before she even saw it. His gaze locked on her, and it was heavier than all the comments on social media combined. Her legs wobbled, and for a second, she thought she might faint. She tried to look away, but her body wouldn't listen. He walked slowly toward the center of the restaurant, his steps perfectly measured. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. When he reached the middle of the room, he stopped, dead center. The pause was deliberate, controlled, the kind of pause that demanded attention. He took off his sunglasses slowly, hooking them onto his collar. His eyes, now visible, scanned the room once more, calm, sharp, unyielding. "I'm sure y'all know who I am by now," he said, his voice smooth but firm, filling every inch of the room, not loud but powerful. "And I'm sure y'all know why I'm here." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. He nodded slowly, looking at each staff member one by one, letting them feel the weight of his words. "The other night, I came here just like anybody else. No cameras, no spotlight, no entourage, just me." His eyes landed on Jessica. She flinched. "I watched, I listened, I saw it all," he continued, his voice like rolling thunder. "And what I saw," he tilted his head slightly, letting his words hang in the air, "was straight up disrespect."
Uncharted territory.
Jessica's knees nearly buckled. Her breathing became shallow, her chest tight with panic. Snoop pointed toward her, slow and deliberate. "You, step forward." Her eyes darted toward Victor, silently begging for help, but he didn't move. Nobody did. She stepped forward, legs stiff, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Look at me," Snoop said. Slowly, she lifted her eyes to meet his. Her lip quivered. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her apron. "You know what you did," Snoop said quietly, but every word hit harder than a shout. "You know how you made me feel, but you didn't just disrespect me." He gestured to the other patrons in the restaurant. "You disrespected everybody in this place." Jessica's breath came out in short, shallow bursts. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, too scared to cry. "Now tell me," Snoop said, his eyes locked on hers. "Why should I let you stay?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled, and she shook her head like a child caught stealing. "That's what I thought," Snoop said, his voice cold and final. He glanced toward Victor. "She's done. Pack her up." Victor nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." "Everybody else," Snoop said, his gaze sweeping across the staff, "take notes. This ain't just about me. It's about everybody who walks through these doors. I built this place to be a spot for everybody. And if you ain't down with that, then you can walk too." Jessica covered her face with her hands as the first tears fell. Cameras outside flashed endlessly. Reporters shouted questions from the window. Snoop put his sunglasses back on, his face like stone. "Y'all know what it is," he said, walking toward the door. "This ain't over." And just like that, he was gone. The restaurant was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm, when every second feels heavier than the last. The door had barely finished swinging shut behind Snoop Dogg, but his presence lingered like an echo in every corner of the room. Staff stood frozen like statues, their eyes darting from one person to another. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to do. Jessica was gone, taken away in front of everyone, and if Snoop's words meant anything, she wouldn't be the last. Victor stood in the middle of the dining room, loosening his tie like it was choking him. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with a napkin, muttering to himself. "This is bad. This is real bad," he said, pacing near the server station. His eyes darted around like he was searching for a lifeline, but there wasn't one. "Corporate's gonna kill me for this." Carlos glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Victor. "What you think corporate's gonna do? They saw what we saw. Half of it's all over the internet." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "Man, I told y'all was doing too much. Now look." Tyler leaned against the kitchen doorway, his face tense but his voice calm. "You told them, not me. I ain't say nothing to that man. Y'all was laughing, y'all was talking, y'all was being bold, and now look. Cameras everywhere, reporters everywhere. Y'all want it to be funny, now it's funny, huh?" He folded his arms, letting his eyes slowly move across the room, landing on Carlos, then Victor. Ain't so funny now. Victor spun toward Tyler, pointing a finger like he'd just been accused of something. Don't start with me, Tyler. You're just as much a part of this as anybody else. Me? Tyler's eyebrows shot up. You better check yourself, boss man. I stayed in that kitchen, made my orders, and kept it pushing. I didn't laugh. I didn't snicker. I didn't throw no shade. So don't point no fingers at me unless you're ready to point one at yourself. The air was thick with tension, like something was about to snap. Nobody spoke, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Who's next? It didn't take long to find out. The front door swung open again. This time, no bell rang, no casual chime, just the sharp sound of wood against metal as the door hit the stopper. 3 men walked in. No, not men, security, black suits, earpieces, broad shoulders. They moved with purpose, slow and deliberate, like lions walking into a den of hyenas. Behind them, a man in a gray suit followed. He didn't need to say who he was. Everyone knew. Corporate had arrived. The man in the suit adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes scanning the room with the same cold calculation Snoop had shown earlier. He didn't have to raise his voice. Everyone already knew he was in charge. He walked to the center of the room, his gaze shifting from one employee to the next like he was taking attendance. Listen up, he said, his voice smooth but sharp. I'm Daniel Cross, Regional Director. He let that title hang in the air for a moment like it had weight. I think you all know why I'm here. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Daniel's eyes stopped on Victor. Manager, step forward. Victor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down like he'd just swallowed a whole ice cube. He stepped forward, slowly, trying to look calm, but his eyes were wild with panic. Yes, sir, he said, voice cracking slightly. I've been managing the situation, keeping everything under control. Stop, Daniel said, holding up one hand. His voice was like a blade slicing through Victor's excuses. If you were managing the situation, we wouldn't be here. He glanced at one of the security guards, who pulled out a sleek black tablet and tapped on the screen. You know what this is? Daniel asked, tilting his head slightly. Victor blinked, his eyes darting between the tablet and Daniel. I don't... This is footage, Daniel said, tapping the screen once. Footage from the security cameras in this restaurant. Footage from last night. Footage from this morning. His eyes were locked on Victor now, sharp as broken glass. Want to see yourself in it? Victor's face went pale. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Daniel waved one hand, and the security guard pressed a button. The tablet screen lit up. There it was. Clear as day. Victor standing in the server station laughing with Jessica. He wasn't doing anything to stop it. He wasn't saying a word to correct it. He was in it. See, this is the problem, Daniel said, eyes still on Victor. It's not just the staff, it's the leadership. And when leadership is rotten, everything under it rots too. Sir, I can explain, Victor said, his voice cracking even more now. I was just... No, Daniel cut him off, his tone firm and final. You were just gone. Effective immediately. He pointed to the door. Turn in your keys and get out. Victor's mouth fell open, but no words came out. He looked around the room, hoping to find someone on his side, but there was nobody. No Carlos, no Tyler, no one. He reached for his keychain, his hands shaking as he unhooked it from his belt and handed it to the nearest security guard. Can I at least... No, Daniel said, cutting him off again. You can leave. Victor turned towards the door, walking slowly like every step hurt. The other employees watched him in silence, not a single word of support offered. The moment the door closed behind him, Daniel clapped his hands once, the sound echoing off the walls. All right, he said, his eyes sweeping the room once more. Here's how this is gonna go. He folded his arms, his suit jacket stretching across his shoulders. If you were laughing, you're out. If you were watching and saying nothing, you're out. If you think Snoop Dogg's name means less than the other customers that walk through this door, you're out. Silence. Nobody dared move. You got 2 choices right now, Daniel continued, his eyes narrowing. You can walk out on your own, or I can make that decision for you. But one way or another, this place is getting cleaned up today. Carlos glanced at Tyler, then at the other servers. His jaw tightened. Man, I ain't do nothing wrong, he muttered, mostly to himself. But Daniel heard it. Good, Daniel said, his eyes snapping to Carlos. Then you won't have a problem staying. He shifted his gaze to the others. But for those of you who did do something wrong, go ahead and clock out. Now. Nobody moved at first, but then one server pulled off their apron, tossed it onto a table, and walked out without a word. Another followed, then another. Within 5 minutes, 6 of staff members had left. Daniel nodded slowly, watching them go. Good. Saves me the paperwork. He turned toward the rest of the employees. For those of you still here, understand this. We ain't just running a restaurant. We're running Snoop Dogg's restaurant. That name means something. People expect better. I expect better. If you stay, you're signing up for that standard. If you don't, there's the door." The weight of his words sank in. "Training starts tomorrow," Daniel said, turning toward the door. "New rules, new policies, zero tolerance." He paused at the entrance, looking over his shoulder one last time. "If I see anyone on social media bragging, laughing, or talking sideways about what went down here, I promise you, it'll be your last day in this business." With that, he left. The door swung shut, and this time nobody breathed a sigh of relief. They knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Tyler glanced at Carlos, tilting his head toward the door. "Still think it's a joke?" Carlos didn't answer. He just walked toward the kitchen, head down, hands in his pockets. But Tyler didn't miss the look on his face. That look of someone who just realized the game they were playing was over. The atmosphere inside the restaurant was different now, not quiet, not tense, just still. The kind of stillness that follows a storm. Tables sat neatly arranged, chairs pushed in perfectly, silverware lined like it was being judged for a magazine spread. But it wasn't the furniture that had changed. It was the people.
Paying your bills on time raises your credit score, right? Wrong. In fact, this is one of the three
The staff moved with quiet precision, their eyes locked on their tasks like their lives depended on it. Nobody was talking. Nobody was laughing. The air, once filled with small talk and subtle gossip, was now replaced with the crisp sound of plates clinking softly and the faint hiss of the kitchen stove. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. The silence was deafening. Carlos wiped down a nearby table, his jaw tight. His eyes darted around the room every few seconds, watching his coworkers with suspicion. His movements were fast, almost frantic. Nobody said it, but he knew what they were all thinking. Am I next? Tyler stood by the kitchen window, tapping his fingers on the countertop. His eyes stayed on Carlos, watching him like a hawk. Tyler wasn't laughing anymore. His usual cocky attitude was gone, replaced by something colder, smarter. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was just waiting. "Keep wiping, Carlos," Tyler muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Ain't nobody trying to hear you breathe heavy like you running a marathon." Carlos glared at him, but he didn't say anything. Not today. Not after what happened to Jessica and Victor. His pride wasn't worth it. Not today. The kitchen door swung open and in walked Daniel Cross, flanked by 2 security guards. The man didn't need to say a word. Just his presence was enough to set the whole room on edge. Every server, cook, and busser went stiff, their eyes lowering to the ground. Daniel's leather dress shoes clicked against the floor with each step, sharp and steady. He walked to the center of the dining room, slowly turning in place, taking it all in. The silence was heavy. The weight of it pressed down on everyone like gravity had suddenly doubled. "Better," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "Much better." He slowly turned toward the staff. "I see some of you still here." His eyes scanned the room like a scanner checking for faults. "That's a good sign. Means you're serious. Means you understand what's at stake now." He paused, his eyes locking onto Carlos, then moving to Tyler, and then sweeping over the newer servers like Emily and Rachel. "New rules are in effect as of right now," Daniel said, his tone sharp. "No more. It's just a job energy. This ain't a job. This is a business. This is Snoop Dogg's business. Every eye is on us. You think I'm exaggerating? Look outside." Carlos glanced toward the window. The reporters were still out there. Cameras, microphones, people standing with their phones raised, recording. They hadn't left. If anything, more of them had shown up. Crowds gathered at the edge of the street, just waiting for something to happen. Carlos's stomach churned. Every move he made, every breath, every mistake, was now public property. "From this point forward," Daniel continued, "everything you do reflects on this brand. You burn food? That's on the brand. You roll your eyes at a customer? That's on the brand. You so much as breathe sideways at somebody in here and it will be on you. Not later. Not after a talk. Not after a warning." Right then. He raised a hand and snapped his fingers. Gone. The room stayed silent. No one dared to nod. No one dared to breathe too loud. "Y'all understand that?" Daniel's voice was sharp like a crack of thunder. "Yes, sir," they said in near unison, voices low and shaky. "Say it again," Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. "Louder." "Yes, sir." This time it was firm, like soldiers responding to a drill sergeant. Daniel nodded slowly. "Good. I like that. I like that energy." He stepped forward, eyes moving from face to face. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to make sure you win. Some of you will get it. Some of you won't. And for those that don't, well," he glanced toward the front door. "You know where the door is." Silence followed. Heavy, cold, final. Then, like an aftershock, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, his eyes narrowing. A small grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "He's here," he said softly, putting the phone back in his pocket. The room shifted. Heads turned. Even Tyler leaned forward, his eyes sharp with curiosity. "Who's here?" Emily asked, her voice quiet but filled with nervous energy. Daniel didn't answer. He just turned toward the front entrance, his hands clasped behind his back. A shadow moved across the glass door, then the door swung open. Snoop Dogg walked in. No hoodie, no disguise. He was sharp, dressed in a black designer suit with a gold chain resting perfectly against his chest, shades still on, chin raised, walk slow, smooth. Reporters outside yelled his name, flashes of light popping like fireworks behind him, but he didn't look back. His focus was straight ahead. The air changed again. It wasn't fear anymore, it was gravity. The weight of his presence pulled every eye in the room toward him. Some people shrank under that pressure, others stood straighter, trying to make themselves smaller, less noticeable. But there was no hiding from him. Not now. Snoop's eyes scanned the room like a camera panning over a crowd. Carlos didn't move, Tyler didn't blink. Emily gripped her apron so tight her knuckles went white. Snoop stepped forward, slow and steady, letting his footsteps echo like a heartbeat. One step at a time. He reached the center of the room, his eyes scanning every face, locking on to Carlos for a half-second longer than the others. Carlos felt it. His breath hitched. "You," Snoop said, pointing at Carlos. "What's your name?" Carlos's heart stopped. He cleared his throat, hands suddenly damp with sweat. "Carlos," he stammered. "Sir?" Snoop nodded once, slowly. "You a hard worker, Carlos?" "Yes, sir," Carlos replied quickly, nodding so fast it looked unnatural. "Yes, sir, I am." Snoop tilted his head, eyes narrowing. He glanced at Tyler. "You agree with that?" Tyler didn't hesitate. "Man works hard. Ain't no lie in that." Silence followed. Snoop's gaze lingered on Carlos for another second, then he nodded once. "All right." He glanced at Daniel, who gave him a slow nod of approval. Snoop turned toward the rest of the room. "Y'all know why I'm here. You know what I'm about. Respect. Every customer that walks through this door, they get the same energy y'all give me, no matter who they are, no matter what they look like." He glanced toward Emily. "That sound good to you?" "Yes, sir," she said, nodding quickly. "Good," he said, his voice slow, deliberate, like each word carried weight. "Then prove it." He glanced at Daniel, nodding once. "Show him the new rules, D." Daniel stepped forward, pulling out a sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. "These are the new policies," he said, his eyes moving across the room. "From now on, every employee will undergo training on respect, service, and professionalism. This training is not optional. It's required. Every single person." A few people exchanged nervous glances. "Those who finish the training, stay. Those who don't," Daniel gestured towards the door, "you already know." Snoop tilted his head, letting his gaze sweep over them one last time. "This is the last time I'm walking in here like this," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "Next time I'm expecting smiles, respect, and pride. You get me?" "Yes, sir," they all shouted in unison. He smirked. "That's more like it." He turned toward the door, his suit moving like liquid silk. The cameras flashed like crazy outside as he pushed the door open. "Tell him Snoop sent you," he said, flashing a grin before stepping out into the blinding light of the cameras. The restaurant stayed still for another minute. No one spoke. No one moved. Tyler finally let out a long, slow breath, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yeah," he muttered, shaking his head. "This ain't never gonna be the same." The morning sun cast long beams of light through the front windows of the restaurant, cutting through the still air like sharp knives. The smell of fresh coffee lingered as the staff moved quietly, each one more focused than they had ever been before. The sounds of plates clinking, cups being stacked, and soft footsteps filled the room. No one spoke louder than necessary. No one dared to. It wasn't just another shift, it was the first day of a new era. Emily stood by the front counter, her hands neatly folding stacks of napkins. Her eyes flickered every so often toward the front door, expecting it to swing open at any moment. She glanced at Carlos, who was wiping down a table for the third time in 5 minutes. "You nervous?" Emily asked softly, keeping her eyes on the napkins. Carlos exhaled deeply, his hands gripping the cloth tighter than necessary. "Nervous? Nah," he muttered, his jaw tight. "I'm focused." "Yeah?" she said, giving him a sideways glance. "Focused on not messing up, huh?" Carlos shot her a look but didn't respond. She wasn't wrong, not after what happened with Jessica. Nobody wanted to be the next one walking out that door. Not today, not ever. Behind the kitchen counter, Tyler was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, he was cracking jokes, flipping orders with flair. But today, he moved like a machine, every motion smooth, efficient, and deliberate. No mistakes, no shortcuts. He glanced up at the clock, his eyes narrowing. "He's late," Tyler muttered. "Who?" asked Carlos, his voice low, even though he knew exactly who Tyler meant. "You know who," Tyler replied, eyes fixed on the door. Carlos glanced at the door, too. Snoop was supposed to come in today. Again. They all knew it. He'd said it on his Instagram Live just last night. "Don't think I'm done," he had said. "This ain't over. Y'all gonna see me real soon." The video had gone viral within minutes, and every employee at the restaurant had seen it before they even clocked in for the day. The pressure was real. It wasn't just about their jobs anymore. It was about being on camera, about being seen by the world. Victor was gone. Jessica was gone. Daniel had made it clear that anyone else could be next. The only way to stay safe was to stay perfect. At exactly 11:23 a.m., the door opened. No bell, no warning, no slow swing, just the heavy, deliberate push of the door as it opened wide. There he was. Snoop Dogg walked in like he owned the place, because he did. No hoodie, no shades, no tracksuit. Today, he was in a black-on-black suit with a crisp white button-up shirt underneath. Clean, sharp, eyes forward, no smiles, no nods, just that slow, steady walk that felt like thunder rolling in. Reporters were still outside, cameras pointed straight at him, flashes going off like fireworks. Snoop didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He knew they were watching. Carlos's heart pounded in his chest as he turned back to his table, wiping it down even though it was already spotless. Emily focused harder on her napkins, folding each one with the precision of an artist folding origami. Tyler leaned forward, flipping a pancake on the griddle, eyes locked on his station like his life depended on it. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved more than they had to. Snoop stepped into the center of the dining room, his eyes scanning the room like a lion surveying his pride. He saw everything, every glance, every shift in body language, every ounce of fear. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, smooth, but so sharp it cut through the air like a knife. "Good morning, sir," the staff echoed in unison. He raised an eyebrow, his eyes scanning each of them. "Better," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made Carlos stand up straighter without realizing it. "Much better." Daniel Cross walked in right behind him, dressed in his usual gray suit. He didn't have to say a word. He stood at Snoop's side, hands behind his back, nodding as if to say, "You see this? You see how serious we are?" Snoop moved toward the counter. Emily was the closest. Her heart pounded as he stopped in front of her. She glanced up, eyes wide but steady. "What's your name?" Snoop asked, tilting his head slightly. "Emily," she said, her voice stronger than she expected it to be. "Emily, sir." He looked her up and down for a moment. "You do good work, Emily?" "Yes, sir," she said with a nod. "I do." Snoop's eyes lingered on her for another second before he nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said, his voice low but firm. "Keep doing it." "Thank you, sir," she said, her face flushing with pride. He moved to Carlos next. Carlos felt his chest tighten, but he kept his face neutral. "Don't flinch," he told himself. "Don't flinch." Snoop stepped close, his eyes locked on Carlos like a spotlight. "You still focused, Carlos?" Carlos nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Always." Snoop leaned in just a bit, lowering his voice but making it more intense. "See, you was looking nervous last time I was here. Now I'm back, and you look sharp. Keep it that way." He patted Carlos on the shoulder once, firm but not rough, a gesture that carried more weight than words. "Yes, sir," Carlos said, his voice strong, his heart pounding like a drum. Snoop turned, his gaze landing on Tyler. Tyler didn't wait for a question. "I'm ready," he said, his voice clear, his chin raised just a little higher than before. "Been ready, boss." Snoop's smile cracked for the first time. It wasn't big, just a small, knowing smirk. "That's what I like to hear." He tapped his knuckles on the countertop twice. "You keep that same energy, Tyler. I see you." Tyler nodded, his face stone cold. "Yes, sir." Snoop turned to face the entire restaurant. He looked at the staff. He looked at the empty tables, the polished floors, the spotless counters. He nodded once, hands in his pockets, his eyes calm but sharp. "Y'all passed the first test," he said, his voice carrying weight like thunder rolling in the distance. "But this ain't about one shift. It's about every shift, every customer, every order. Ain't no more bad days. No more slip-ups." His eyes swept across the staff, his gaze like a spotlight, catching every single one of them. The world is watching us now, cameras outside, phones in people's hands. The whole world got eyes on this spot. He let that sink in. The silence that followed was louder than any words could have been. "But here's the thing," Snoop said, his voice slower, softer, but somehow even more powerful. "When people see this place now, I don't want them thinking about what it used to be. I want them thinking, that's Snoop's spot. That's a place where you get respect. You feel me?" "Yes, sir," they all said together, louder, stronger. Snoop nodded slowly. He glanced at Daniel. "Start the training," he said. Daniel nodded, pulling a tablet from his jacket pocket. "Starts today," he said, his voice cold but focused. "No excuses. Everyone here's got 2 weeks to complete it. Respect training, conflict de-escalation, Customer service. You miss one day, you're out. You miss one assignment, you're out. He glanced at each of them, his eyes just as sharp as Snoop's. No warnings, no second chances. The staff nodded, faces serious, eyes locked in. Snoop turned back to the crowd, letting his gaze land on each one of them. Slowly, intentionally. No words, just wait. Y'all know me, he said, his voice quiet but powerful. You know I don't do fake love, I do respect. And if you give it, you get it back. He glanced around one more time, letting his words settle into their bones. Don't make me come back like this again, he said, his voice like a final warning. Next time, I'm expecting smiles, not excuses. He turned, walking toward the door, hands in his pockets, slow and smooth as ever. As he walked out, every single person in the room exhaled at the same time. Y'all feel that? Tyler said, shaking his head. Carlos leaned on the counter.